All right, so I put a link in the chat. I'm going to try something new today, a la Patrick and his interactive slides. It's not exactly poll everywhere, but I put a link, and what you'll get access to is called a class. It's most often used by classroom teachers, so I hope you won't mind. The application is going to call you a student, but this is not so much a student classroom environment, but more just we're trying to be a little bit more interactive today. All right, so I'm going to go. I see 42 people have connected. So if you don't want to join, it's okay. I've just added a couple different things in our slides just to kind of keep it fun and upbeat. And I just wanted to try it out and see how it's going to go. All right, so I'm going to start the class and I'm going to share my slides. Okay, can you guys see my screen? You should see my slides here. Okay. Yep. All right, so today is the CDM workshop part 1. And really what we're trying to do with these workshops, and workshops might be a little bit of a misnomer for this audience, because usually workshops you think about hands-on activities, really diving deep into a project or a problem. And today and over the next meeting, what we wanted to do was give you guys an idea of the breadth of expertise within the CDM working group. So if you want to join a future workshop, you have an idea of the kinds of questions you can ask and the kinds of topics we can help you with, and really what we're trying to do here with these workshops, and really be a support system for the community and for you all. And so I already know, I think it was Vishnu said he's new, so welcome. I'm hoping we have some other new folks, as I know some of this content will be repetitive for our OHDSI old hats, but hopefully you'll learn something new as well. All right, so we're going to talk about the journey from data to data. I know often in OHDSI we talk about the journey from data to reliable evidence. And we talk about our reliable evidence a lot because that's really what we're here for. We're here to generate evidence as a community that improves the lives of patients around the world. But within these workshops and within the next 2 days, we really want to focus on the journey from your patient level data in your source system to your patient level data in the Common Data Model. So if you take that line and you stretch it out, and you've got 8 little dots there, we work together in our working group to come up with what are the stops on the journey from your data in your source system to your data in the Common Data Model. And what we came up with is you want to think about your technical considerations for setting up your CDM. You want to have a good handle on your data governance. We also have the White Rabbit and Rabbit in a Hat tools that are very helpful for understanding your native data, as well as then facilitating the structural mapping of your data from source to standard. We've then got USAGI, which is a wonderful vocabulary mapping tool. We've then got a data quality tool, as well as a characterization tool to help you understand how well you've converted your data from source to standard, and then just help you understand your data as a whole. And then ACHILLES starts to get you to that point where you're benefiting from the open science community and all those million lines of code that Paul was talking about. And then at the end, we had another one, which is technical considerations for studies. So you have your CDM set up, and now you want to be involved in a study, and what do you need to think about from a technical perspective. So today we're going to talk about these first 4 stops on the journey, and then our next meeting next week, we're going to talk about the other 4 steps. All right, so Frank is going to take us through our technical piece. Kristin is going to talk to us about data governance, and then Maxim is going to take us through the tools White Rabbit and Rabbit in a Hat and how those work. Okay, Frank, I hand it off to you.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm here to provide just a few brief comments on technical considerations for getting started on your journey. And to start, you're going to need a relational database. And the OHDSI community provides support for a wide variety of platforms. Members of the community are actively working with most of the database platforms on this list of supported database platforms. The underlying support, or why we say these are supported, is derived through a couple of our R packages that provide ways for our tools to connect to and query different relational database platforms. So if you needed a database not on this list, or if you had a particular issue that you were running into, you would look for support from the database connector or SQL render packages. But to get started, you would make a choice of one of these platforms, whatever suits your infrastructure and your technical skill sets that you have available in your organization. There are often a lot of questions that come up around the scaling of your infrastructure. So how much memory do I need? How many cores? How much disk space? And unfortunately, the topic is a little bit too broad for this conversation. And the truth is, in my typical consultant fashion, that it depends on many different factors that are unique to your environment and data. But that's really the fact here. Uh, the good news is we have all different shapes and sizes of databases and platforms within this community, and you'll find that members across the community are very willing to help you if you're just starting out and need to get a small database up and running, or if you're growing into one of our larger data holders and you need massively distributed parallel processing data environments. We have people in all those states, and so whatever place you are in, there's going to be someone you could work with to understand how to best fit your needs and scale to your growth potential. Okay, next slide. So now that you've selected a database platform, it's time to create the schema for a supported version of the CDM. And we currently recommend all community members use the 5.4 release. The OHDSI community provides a few different R packages that are helpful for getting started, and one of them is the Common Data Model package, in which a single line of code will allow you to create all of your necessary tables. Once those tables exist, you'll then need to load a vocabulary. And so I call it the vocabulary content, because the CDM Common Data Model package will create your tables, but then you need to load your vocabulary tables with concepts, concept relationships, concept ancestors, and all the other fun stuff that will then help you down the road with your ETL. The vocabulary content itself can be obtained by downloading it from Athena, which is an OHDSI website that provides access to the vocabulary files and that you use to populate your vocabulary tables. Okay, and next slide. And so here we see when you're finished with those steps, you'll have a database that resembles this diagram. So you'll see one section there in the center that describes the standardized vocabulary. That is a set of tables that you would have populated with the content, which you got from Athena after creating this overall database with the Common Data Model package on your chosen SQL platform running the 5.4 schema of the Common Data Model. And at this point, you're ready to load up all of your data. But before you load your data, there are some non-technical topics that you should consider.
Okay, before we move on to Kristin, this is the first interactive piece of this presentation. So if you are logged in and you are participating, you should see a blue dot on your screen. My question to you is, how confident are you with your personal CDM technical considerations or your technical setup? So if you just drag your blue dot, I should see a lot of people kind of falling, a lot of people in the green, but a lot of people falling all along the spectrum between super confident or not confident. And that's actually really helpful. That means that in a future workshop that we'll of course be sending you guys information about as those are scheduled, it means that maybe we need to spend some time on additional technical understandings and how to set up your own database. This is super fun, by the way. I wasn't sure if this is going to work, so this is great. Thank you for participating. All right, now I hand it over to Kristin, and she's going to talk to us about data governance.
So who's excited about governance? Who gets up and is like, ooh, governance, this is my favorite topic. It's you, right? Me too. As it turns out, I published a paper this week about it and I forgot. So let's have a quick tour to talk about governance. So next slide. What is data governance? If this term doesn't mean anything to you, it's just the process that we outline how we organizationally manage and control our data. And it really is important because we want to make sure that we're consistent with how we use our data, that we're trustworthy, that there's no misuse. Simple, right? Next slide. So why does it matter in OMOP? Well, we're person-centric and we are retaining things that some might call personal identified information or protected health information. Now I'm showing my bias that that's like an Americanism. You might call it something else in your home language. And there are many, many ways that your CDM may be treated to uphold local protocols as it relates to protecting the trustworthiness and misuse of that information. Next slide. So what is your responsibility if you are a data holder inside of OHDSI's community? Well, we expect you to know, understand, and follow your local governance processes. And if you don't know what they are, well, let's talk today about some ideas of how to set some up. Next slide. Now, it's worth saying there are different rules depending on where you sit. So if you're in Europe, you probably know GDPR. If you're in the US, you probably know HIPAA and how to misspell it. And there's lots of rules around this. And I just flashed these as exemplars. There are many others depending on where you sit. So just know that different sites have different rules and to be prepared when you're interacting with sites too, that these are things they have to navigate. Next slide. So where do privacy concerns tend to show up, or where does governance start to care? We care about things like your date of birth. We care about where you are physically located, or maybe where your provider is located. We care about the precise dates that you receive a clinical therapy or an event happens to you. We care about what we might call sensitive conditions, psychological or mentally related clinical conditions. We care about when you die and how you die. I know that sounds kind of silly. How, if I'm dead, what does that mean? Well, we care about protecting you and your privacy even when you are passed. And so if you think about these areas, next slide, there's a few places they come up in your CDM. So your date fields, we see these across many of our domains. We have date and date time. There's also this place in many of our domains. The star is obviously the name of, and we have lots of source values that we can preserve both the provenance of how we got information, but we also have the opportunity to put things in there that might be sensitive. And anytime we have strings, which can come up in a number of domains, we might have problems because there might be more information in there than we realize. So person table is obviously quite sensitive and we are a person-centric model. Location can be very sensitive as well. There are zip codes in there. There are addresses. There are counties. There's the provider table, observation. And of course, those of you in our Note and Note NLP work group, you guys have obviously been talking a lot about information in that domain. And it's just worth saying that there are lots of places that governance might want you to inspect and interrogate your data as you are using it. So I'm not here to give you all the rules. I'm here to get you aware of where you just might have to slow down and ask questions as you are navigating both the use of your data internally and as you share results. And in the next slide, if you're curious, I actually wrote, how did I end up here today? Well, it turns out in the Docuthon, I wrote an article for Claire that I forgot that I wrote. And then Maxim said, Kristin, you should do this section. It was such a great article. There's a really nice wiki here with some information. And we'll walk you through exactly kind of some of the considerations. There's a lot more detail on the specific areas that I just called out in the last slide. So take a stumble over there. If you have more questions, we can also engage on the forum, but that's really meant to be your beginning kind of double click on some of these areas. And in the next slide, I'm gonna give you a little bit of alphabet soup. So this is my favorite thing, is to just throw terms at people and hope they understand my jargon. So when we talk about alphabet soup governance edition, and if I could, I'd have that Adam Driver, meme, good soup, good soup. There's a lot of good terms in here. You're going to hear about your institutional review board. That's really inside your organization who's making sure you are ethically conducting research. You might call it different things. If you're a commercial entity, you might not have one. You might have some other type of oversight committee. You have, yes, the great meme. You have your data use agreements, your data transfer agreements, your data use requests. These all sound like I'm repeating the word data many times. These are different constructs around both accessing data for analysis. In some rare cases, you might be in a situation where you are transferring and in a program where you're allowed to do that. So that would be a very specific type of agreement. Data use requests can be quite broad and really be related to how you are analytically interacting with your data. The good news is that in OHDSI, we fully specify our protocols before we go out and do anything. So we are well positioned to file DURs and be very specific about what information we're not touching and what we're not doing. And of course, you might hear things like city training. And I didn't write out city because I don't know anyone that writes city out. It's like CVS. You just kind of say it. It's a training protocol, especially for US-based projects. A lot of groups mandate you do modules. It's a thing that you'll do periodically. There are definitely equivalents in other research consortia. You might hear the word data steward, and that really refers to the person who is interacting with the data and is generally empowered to have a governance kind of position and understand the processes and protocols. So when you're running network studies, be nice to your data stewards. They're doing the best they can to navigate the rules they're given, and they have really different rule books depending on what we're up to. So just something to note. You might hear things like LDS or limited data set. And you might also hear terms like synthetic data set. Limited data set is a term that really talks about the protection and the use of very, very sensitive information in the protocols for using it. And then synthetic data is kind of its almost polar opposite, where they are actually kind of creating a almost real likeness data set. And we have colleagues in the OHDSI community who have done some exceptional work on this. Our Tufts colleagues are just actually, I think their weekly win is they just got certified on a synthetic data set. So each of these things have lots of processes underneath them. There's lots of knowledge that we can share if you're curious. But today I just want you to walk away with enough to be dangerous. So you've had a dose of soup. It was a small nom, there's more to learn there. And the last thing, next slide, I want to leave you with is just this reminder that we have two types of data querying. And I stole this from our friends at N3C. I think it's really nice. We mostly in OHDSI do the left, where we are federated querying. We are sending out packages and sending back results. There are some examples in our community of centralized analytics where we actually send data to a secure place. This happens in all of us. It happens in N3C. And that's just a different world. So just a reminder that there are many flavors of governance. There are many flavors of data querying. There are many acronyms that we're just going to hope you remember. And when in doubt, ask for help. So our next slide, I think this is my last slide. Don't be that guy. Governance is not one size fits all. If you know who your local IRB and privacy office are, work with them when you're running studies to make sure as you're using your CDM, you're in compliance. And when in doubt, ask for help before you break the rules. And you can call me up. I might not know all your rules, but I can certainly direct you to folks who do. And first one to figure it out tells the rest, right? So I see there are some questions in the chat I'll try to respond to as we go, but I'm going to turn it back to Claire.
All right. We've got another pulse check. So you should see on your screen now a question, and it gives you the opportunity to answer. So the question is, it is the responsibility of the data holder to know, understand, and follow their specific data governance rules. True or false? Let's see. Where are we falling? All right, good. Most of us are falling in the correct answer, which is true. It is your responsibility, as Kristin went through, to understand your own data governance rules, because as she said, we are a federated network. And so you're responsible for making sure you are following your own data use agreements and privacy rules. All right. Okay, it's working. Thank you. Going great. All right, so now we're going to move to Maxim, and he's going to share with us a little bit about, okay, now you've got your tech stack stood up, you understand how you can use your data. How do you now start understanding what you have in your source data and then start mapping it to the CDM?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So there are two tools in the OHDSI tool stack that will help you with that. White Rabbit to understand your data and RabbitNet to design the transformation to the OMOP CDM. Next slide. Short reminder where we are in the ETL process. Claire already gave a nice overview. This is the point where data experts and CDM experts come together to design the ETL. Next slide. And one of the tools that can help is White Rabbit. This is a quick overview of the functionalities. So White Rabbit will create a scan report of your data. It profiles your source data, creates an overview of tables, fields, and values in your source data system, and gives record counts and statistics on your data. It supports both delimited text, but also SAS files, and 8 different relational database management systems that it can connect to. A lesser known feature is that it has a fake data generator, which based on the scan report can create fake tables with random values in each column. Next slide. So why should you create a scan report? Well, it helps understanding the structure of your source data. And this is the, so it provides all the tables, all the fields, and what are the most occurring values in each field. More importantly, maybe, this scan report, this Excel file, is also the input for Rabbit in a head. And that is where it really shines. Next slide. You can skip this one. Yeah, next. So what is Rabbit in a head? Rabbit in a head can facilitate a mapping workshop where you sit together with source data experts, CDM experts, the clinical experts to design the mapping to the OMOP CDM. It provides an overview of source tables from the White Rabbit scan report and already has built in multiple CDM definitions. This also supports already CDM version 5.4. But you can also enter your custom target model. I had a GIF here, but that is not playing apparently. That's fine. Then
I'm sorry, Maxime.
Interpretive dance, go for it.
It's a lot of text now, but that's fine. The output of RabbitNet is a document that where you document the transformation rules. And you do this by linking the table to table and field to field. And I hope the next slide is not an empty slide, because that just is a picture of hopefully moving Rabbit in a head. I was afraid so. So what should be showing here is how you can explore.
Here, Maxime, I've got it open on my PowerPoint so that we can go this way.
And maybe there
we go, because I thought this might happen.
Thanks. Yeah, I couldn't do a live demo, so this is a bit of a replacement of that. So you can explore the scan report basically in Rabbit in a head. So you see all the source tables on the left and all the fields in this on the right. And it was moving, it stopped for some reason. Could you try to reload once, Claire? Yeah, because the nice thing is you can then, within the table, look at the fields and see all the values in those fields. This is the same information as the scan report, but it's a nice way to interactively walk through the source structure and see what values are in each field. And then with that knowledge, you can start designing your transformation rules in this same application. Next slide. So yeah, that's the creation of the mapping specification. So linking source tables to target tables, source fields to target fields, and then documenting per transformation rule also what the logic is. So should you filter something? Should you transform? So for instance here, for a birth date, you should only take the year of birth to populate populate that field in the CDM. Next slide. And then the output of Rabbit and Hat is a document, could be either a Word document, could be an HTML or a Markdown document, where all these rules are documented, and this can be handed towards the ETL developers. Next slide. Also important, this is a living document, and ideally published somewhere, at least within your organization, that people can see what rules you have implemented to populate your OMOP CDM. Next slide. Oh, by the way, that's an example of the ETL CDM builder, which is very nicely accessible as a GitHub.io page. Then a comment on the STEM table. So the vocabulary drives the data movement. So in some cases, not the code from a condition table will actually not be a condition occurrence. For instance, the code for an abnormal weight gain, which might be in a condition table in the source, is actually an observation code, an observation concept. So it should end up in the observation table in OMOP. In Rabbit in the Hat, you can use the STEM table, which is a domain agnostic intermediate, to map your source to, and then Rabbit in the Hat provides the mappings from the STEM table to the different OMOP domains. You still have to implement it as well in your ETL, in your transformation scripts. But this is an easy way to document that you let the vocabulary drive the movement of the data, the domain, target domain of the data. And the STEM table basically contains all the fields that you will find in any of these OMOP domains. Next slide. So in such a workshop where you define your mappings, you not only want to concentrate on that, but also just get general information on your database, technical specifications, as also Frank went through, the data provenance, use cases, why are you transforming the data to the OMOP CDM, how often should it be refreshed, are there any data restrictions, governance issues, and who is the main contact. In general, get to know the source data. Then on the next slide, I have a final remark and a bit of an outlook for next week. So Rabbit and Hat is only for creating structural mapping specification, and documenting mapping decisions. It's about which source fields are the input for which OMOP CDM fields. The mapping of values to standard concepts, the semantic mapping, is a separate mapping process. And more on the semantic mapping will be next week, where we go into USAGI. I think Melanie will do that. Then the last slide, just take away all this information on the whole ETL process can also be found in the Book of Odyssey, which has it's a nice chapter on that, explaining every step in this journey. With that, I want to hand it back to you, Claire.
Okay, so thank you for dealing with some of our technical issues here, but I think Maxim did a really great job, and thank you for taking us through that, because as you guys can see, there's a lot of different pieces involved getting to your standardized data. So there might be a lot of different pain points for each person, and so what we're trying to do here is kind of show you all the different things that are encompassed in that journey, and then how we in the CDM working group, as well as there's some folks in the education working group and Melanie's working group, who we're all here to try to help us get to the same place so we can generate that all important evidence that we're driving towards. So I had one more interactive slide, though I'm less enamored with this tool now that I know it doesn't work with GIFs very well. Okay, so I had one side, it should be popping up on your side now, and it was really for questions, for you to type some questions here if you had them. I was concerned we wouldn't have time, so I thought if we were able to type questions, kind of like Patrick's poll everywhere, we could keep these and make sure we address them either next time or at an upcoming CDM workshop. So while people type in the chat, is there anybody that wanted to just shout out their question? Okay. The favorite Odyssey ETL tool. Oh, they're all so fun. They're all so great. I think what Maxim has done with Rabbit in a Hat has been fantastic. He's taken over, him and his team have taken over developing Rabbit in a Hat, and I think it is just a phenomenal tool now. If you haven't used it, especially my favorite part is when you pull in your scan report into Rabbit in a Hat, and you don't have to keep flipping back and forth and querying your data. You can just see everything from your scan report. Okay. Question here. Okay. Support for Spanish vocabulary. We actually have, Jose was on the call, and Kristin, I know you're active in the Latin America chapter. Are you guys working on Spanish vocabulary?
Yes, I was trying to get my N right on my text. Yeah, Jose is trying to tackle the many dialects of Spanish that may be of interest to research. And if you are interested, we can add you. I don't know, you're anonymous, so it's a little hard to know who you are, but happy to direct you to there. And if you have a preference, and especially let's say you actually mean Catalan, we also have that covered. So yeah, and I see Erica nodding too. She also has some friends on the other side of the pond.
Okay, so another question, can we share ETL design documents to learn from each other? Absolutely. We really encourage that. So we have a couple groups who do share them. It is really helpful, especially because many of us, if we license data, a lot of us license the same data. So it can be helpful to have ETL documents for some popular data sources available. So we can't always share our code, but we can certainly share our documents. And so we really encourage the community to do so. Sam said common ETL mistakes new groups make. Yeah, and I think there are some overcomplications that people get themselves into. And actually over my kind of evolution as an ETL owner, I find that my ETLs have become simpler over time. So I definitely suggest to keep it simple. Andrew, you have your hand up?
Yeah, the ETL organization. I think there was a while back an interest in kind of collating and having a central place where ETL code that could be shared was put in an organized form. And I was just asking, I'm interested in where we are and if there are milestones for kind of completing that work. I was bringing it up on the oncology call earlier today and didn't know the current state of it, but I think it's an important activity that I hope we move forward on. So if anybody knows where we are with that I was asking about that.
Yeah, so I can share, we actually do have a repository. It is currently empty because we got, myself and a couple other collaborators got together to create the requirements, because what we thought would be important is if you want to contribute to an ETL repository, we need to make sure that you have certain items in your ETL so that it can be useful to someone else. So we got that far, and then I will say it is my fault. I was supposed to push it over the finish line, and we slowed down as we were releasing 5.4. So if there's more interest in the community, we could actually absolutely bring that back up, and we can bring it back to the CDM working group and make sure we get that available to folks. So thank you, Andrew. All right. I saw another hand. I'm not quite sure who. Oh, Nitin. Yes.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a quick question on those economic tables like payer plan period and cost and the new episode table. Are those available? Like available in the Rabbit in the Hat? Like, so just want to check whether those are also available.
Yeah, all tables from version 5.4 are available in Rabbit in a Hat. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So since we have 5 minutes left, I did want to share an anecdote with you. So I was listening to it's gonna tie in, I promise. I was listening to a story this morning about the 1871 Polaris expedition. I don't even know if you guys have heard this before, but it was really interesting to me because there's this group of explorers who are trying to get to the North Pole for the first time. On their way north, they got stranded on an iceberg and they unloaded cargo and 19 people onto an iceberg. Over the night, the iceberg drifted away from the ship and these people were stranded on an iceberg for 6 months. Nobody died, they lived, and then they were picked up off the coast of Labrador. I found this super fascinating and super interesting. And what it made me think about was why we are actually doing these CDM workshops this year. We have so many newcomers to the community, we have so many new collaborators, and we have a huge opportunity with Darwin EU to really change the face of observational health and how we are impacting people's health and everyday well-being. But we can't do that if we are on an iceberg. If some people are drifting out to sea and we don't know or we can't get to you, we can't all be working together. So please don't let yourself get stranded for 6 months or longer. We are here to help you. The reason we went through some of this today and next week is so just to give you an idea of all those things we can help you with. And we really want to be there for you so that we can all be on the same ship. Or all on the same iceberg, however you want to think about it. And it did make me think of March of the CDM because we talked about penguins, Kristin. So really interesting story. Please look it up if you're into that kind of thing. But I just really thought it played into what we were doing here today. So thank you for indulging me.
So hi, everybody. I am really glad that we can be back and that we have so many new people because I do think today is going to be a great day for you guys. So we are going to be going through part 2 of our CDM workshop. But as I was putting this together, I realized while we subscribe to Greek ideology and not Roman, it is the Ides of March. So just beware if we think of the OHDSI Community Call as our Senate. Not that anything's going to happen, but just made me think about it. All right, so let's get going. All right, so like we talked about last time, we are focusing these 2 days on the journey from data to data, or more specifically from the journey from our patient level data in our source system to our standardized data in the Common Data Model. So last time we went over our technical considerations for setup by Frank DeFalco. We had Kristin talk us through what we need to consider for data governance. And then Maxim walked us through structurally mapping our data using White Rabbit and Rabbit in a Hat. So today we're going to go through the OMOP vocabulary, and it's not going to be redundant as to what is going to be presented next week. This is really about OMOP vocabulary and how you map your data, how you map the content of your data, not as much structurally like Maxime showed last time. I'm also going to take you through data quality procedures that we've developed as a community. Anthony Molinaro is going to share with you our characterization tool, ACHILLES, and how it can help you better understand your data once it's been converted to the CDM. And then we're going to hear from Frank again, and he's going to put all these pieces together we've talked about the last few days, and he's going to give us a really nice demo. So because of our demo, I don't have interactive slides today, unfortunately, but I did save those questions from last time, and if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. And we will respond as we go. All right, so here we have all of our speakers today, and we're going to get started with Melanie. So Melanie, I turn it over to you.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Perfect, thank you. My name is Melanie Philofsky, and I lead the Healthcare Systems Interest Group, and I'm going to discuss the OMOP vocabularies today. Next slide. So we're going to discuss the who, what, when, why, and where of the OMOP vocabularies. How does it all work? We're going to discuss custom semantic mapping. One of the tools we use to do this is USAGI, And there's two different ways to do this, using the source to concept map table or what's called the 2 billionaires. And then we're briefly going to go over maintenance. Next slide, please. So the OMOP vocabulary tables, where they came from, who does all this work, what they are with a quick review of source code to concept identity mapping. How do you get these OMOP vocabulary tables, when you get them, and why do you need them? Next slide. So where do we get these vocabulary tables from? Most of the, or not most of them, some of these are in the public domain. Vocabularies such as RX norm already out there and freely available, so we incorporate those into the OHDSI vocabulary. We have also incorporated proprietary vocabularies such as the GPI vocabulary. If you have these codes in your source data, then you have a license to use them, and you can ask your institution for that license and you can get these vocabularies. We also have some homegrown OHDSI concepts or OMOP concepts. One of these is the RX norm extension vocabulary. And as the name implies, this is an extension of the RX norm vocabulary to incorporate the non-US drugs into an extension. So that way it follows the same hierarchy as the RX norm vocabulary. There is an OHDSI vocabulary team dedicated to updating and maintaining these OHDSI vocabularies for us. The thing to note on all these OHDSI vocabularies is that they have different release cycles. So all these OHDSI supported vocabularies such as RX norm, NDC, they are released by the source on various different release cycles. Most of them are on a set schedule of 1 or more times a year, and there are a few vocabularies that have ad hoc releases. Once the source releases these new codes, the OHDSI vocabulary team ingests them and creates concepts with all the attributes. From there, they map them to the standard concept IDs, and this is a continuous and ongoing process. The OHDSI vocabulary GitHub page is the place to raise any issues or any requests for incorporating new vocabularies. Next slide. So, when should you download them? Now's a good time to download them because you can't properly populate an OMOP CDM without them. And if you don't have a populated OMOP CDM, you can't participate in any type of OMOP research, network research, and the OHDSI tools such as ACHILLES aren't usable without these CDMs or without these vocabularies to back them up. So next slide, go to athena.ohdsi.org and click the login button. You fill out the registration form if you're not registered. Once you log in, you can click the download button and then you select the necessary vocabularies. If it is a proprietary vocabulary, something that says it needs a license, then Kristin Reich or someone from the vocabulary team will send you an email asking you for a copy of that license. Just email them back a copy of the license and you'll be able to download all the vocabularies along with all the relationships from your source codes to your concept IDs and your standard concept IDs. Once you send in the license, you don't have to send it in again, and you can just go to Athena at any time to download the more recent vocabularies. Up in the right-hand corner of the screen, you will see a little question mark with a circle. So next slide, please. You click on that, and that will bring you here. And this is the page that will let you know what vocabulary version you're on. It's a good thing to know that the vocabulary version does not align with the CDM version. So you don't need to try to match these up. Right now, the OHDSI community is on, or most folks are going to CDM version 5.4. As you'll see here, the OMOP vocabulary version is 5.0, and it was released on the 4th of February, 2022. You can also find this information of what vocabulary you're on from your source vocabulary tables. And you always want to make sure that when you're collaborating with others that you are all on the same version of the, or using the same version of the OMOP vocabularies. Next slide, please. All right, so the OMOP standardized vocabulary tables include all these tables here. Now, the tables on the left-hand side of the screen, these are the ones we use for ETL and research. And these include the concept table, concept relationship, concept ancestor, and sometimes the source to concept map if that's being used for custom mapping. The tables on the right support the ones on the left and have the fully specified names and other attributes for the tables on the left. Next slide, please. We're going to do a quick review of the concept relationship, and concept ancestor table. So all the content of a concept is in the concept table. It's the concept, it's the source code, the vocabulary, and other attributes. The concept relationship table has all the direct relationships. So these can be parent-child relationships, or even more importantly, these are the equivalency relationships. These are how you use the concept relationship table to map those source concept IDs to your standard concept IDs so you can participate in research. And then the last OMOP table here on the right-hand side is the concept ancestor table. A lot of times these are called the hierarchy tables, and that's because in this table it has all the hierarchical relationships, and these are used a lot by researchers to find drugs of interest if they want to use like a ingredient, and then find all the drugs that contain a certain ingredient. And they also are used when you're looking at condition and diseases of interest. You can come in at different levels within the hierarchy and then find all the children of that. Next slide, please. So there are different, what I like to call, categories of concepts. So we have the non-standard concepts, and these are the unique representations of your source code. It is a source code and the vocabulary ID, which gives you that source concept ID. Then we have the standard concept IDs. Sometimes your source code is represented by a standard concept ID, and sometimes you have to map from your source concept ID to your standard concept ID. The standard concept IDs are used in analytics, the research, and by the OHDSI tools, especially ACHILLES, to find cohorts of interest or concept sets. Then we have classification concepts. Sometimes people call these groupers, and these don't directly represent a row of source data, but they are groupers or classification concepts that contain all the children of an idea. And we use these to perform hierarchical queries or to set up a concept set. Next slide, please. So your source for source code. The first three are use OHDSI supported vocabularies, right? So the first one may come from an international terminology or coding system, such as SNOMED or ISBT. Your source code may come from a country-specific terminology or code system, such as the READ codes, ICD-10-CN, CVX, or BDPM. Sometimes your source code or source value may be free text strings. We see these a lot with the units for vital signs, the routes for drug administration, and also some of the social history and lifestyle context, such as cigarette smoker. Then we also have some proprietary, or not even proprietary, these are custom code systems within your electronic health record, your case report forms, registries, etc. These are specific to your institution or your data source, and you'll only see them there. Next slide, please. So mapping your source codes to the concept ID. So you always map to a standard or non-standard concept IDs. You do not map to the classification concept IDs. Those are only used outside in the vocabulary tables for research to gather concepts of interest. So if your vocabulary is known, you use a combination of your source code and the vocabulary ID to retrieve your concept ID. Sometimes the vocabulary is unknown, such as with routes of administration or the units for vital signs. However, in these cases, you know the domain. So you use the combination of the source code and the domain ID to retrieve your concept ID of interest. And then sometimes you have your custom local source codes, and these need to be mapped to standard concept IDs. And we'll go into a little bit of this in a minute. So next slide, please. So scenario 1, when you have a source code that comes from an OMOP supported vocabulary, use the following conditions to perform the mapping. You match up your source code and the vocabulary ID to the concept table, and that will give you the unique concept identifier. You can see a few examples of that here. Next slide. If your source code is a text string, but you know the domain ID, it's the combination of that source string with the source domain to get you the unique concept identifier for that idea of interest. So you match those up, and as you can see on the right-hand side, you'll get your concept ID of interest. Now, our third scenario, next slide, please, is when your source data does not map to an OHDSI supported vocabulary. So there's two different solutions. One, you ask the OHDSI vocabulary team to incorporate your vocabulary into the OMOP vocabularies. They'll bring it in, they will take them, they will give them source concept IDs, and they will create the relationships and map them to standard concept IDs. Or if that's not possible, then you need to create custom mapping using one of the following two methods, either using the source concept map table or the 2 billionaires method. Next slide, please. So for custom semantic mapping, there is a Java application called USAGI that is available out on GitHub, and I will post links once I'm done speaking here. I'll post all the links into the chat that I'm discussing today, so that way you'll have them at your fingertips. So you can use the USAGI application to help you map your local codes to standard concept IDs, and then you once you have those mappings, you can either use them in the source to concept map table, or you can use the concept and concept relationship tables. And then we're going to discuss when do you not create a custom concept ID. So next slide. Here is a screenshot of the USAGI application. You have to have downloaded your OHDSI vocabularies already in order to map those local codes. You take a CSV of your local codes and you upload them to USAGI. And then it will give you suggestions on mapping. You can narrow this down if you're looking at a certain domain. You map one domain at a time. So you upload a CSV of all your drugs or maybe all of your units. And then you configure it in USAGI to let USAGI know what kind of source data it's looking at. Once you have all your source codes mapped to standard concept IDs, then you can put them into the source to concept map table. So for this, we are going to use an example source code, a pediatric interventional cardiologist. So this source code is not supported by any OHDSI vocabularies. It's a local code, made up local code for an institution. So this is how you would map it to a standard concept ID using the source to concept map table. So you have the source code, which is just a free text string. There was no quote unquote numeric code to identify it. Then you give it a source concept ID, which is a unique identifier greater than 2 billion. The OHDSI vocabulary team has set aside all the numbers greater than 2 billion for use with local institutions. Then you give it a source vocabulary ID. This is another required field. And for this, we're just calling it provider specialty or prov_specialty. We have the source code description, pediatric interventional cardiologist. And then we're mapping it to a standard concept ID, which is 903276. And this comes from the vocabulary, the Medicare specialty vocabulary. We have a valid start date and end date for this mapping. And the invalid reason is null because this is a current mapping. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to discuss the 2 billionaires. we will create a concept, and then we will create the concept relationship. Next slide. So using the same example, pediatric interventional cardiologist, we're going to create a record in the concept table. So once again, we give it a concept ID greater than 2 billion. We give it a concept name. The provider or the domain ID for this is provider. The vocabulary ID, we have a custom vocabulary ID, and this is provider specialty or prov_specialty. And we give it a concept class ID, a physician specialty, because this is a physician specialty. Standard concept ID is null because this is not a standard concept ID. We are creating a record for a source concept ID for this for the pediatric interventional cardiologist. We give it a start and end date. We just use the default start date, which is January 1st, 1970. And since this is a valid concept ID, we give it an end date in the future of 12/31/2099. Next slide. So next, we need to create a concept relationship record to map this source concept ID to a standard concept ID. So for the record number we just created, it was 2.1 billion for the concept ID, and we are mapping it to 903276. All mappings within the concept relationship table are bidirectional. So you create a maps to relationship for your source concept ID to your standard concept ID. And then you also create the opposite relationship, which is mapped from. We give it the default valid start dates and valid end dates because this is a current mapping. Next slide, please. Here's a quick comparison of both the methods. So if you use the source to concept table, source to concept map table, this table is designed for insert statements. You will need to create an additional SQL lookup statement during your ETL because normally we look up the concept and the concept relationship when going from source codes to standard concept IDs. And then since you're using the source to concept map table, you'll just create an additional lookup at your source to concept map table. If you use the concept and concept relationship table or the 2 billionaires, you're going to need to modify the OHDSI provided tables. So you'll need to modify the concept table and the concept relationship table and then the vocabulary table. Using this method does enrich your vocabulary, and it also enables the display of the source concepts in Atlas. So you will be able, your researchers will be able to see what source codes map to that specific standard concept ID that the researchers are going to use for their cohort of interest or in their concept set. And this method is also great for any type of internal use cases. If that pediatric interventional cardiologist wants to see like all the procedures that are done by that provider, they're able to do that. So that's a comparison of both of these methods. Next slide, please. When do you not create a custom concept ID? You don't do that when you have a new source code that is coming from a vocabulary that's already supported by OHDSI. So you may have like some NDC codes being used within your source system right now. OHDSI, it takes a little bit of time for the OHDSI supported vocabularies for these codes to be ingested by the OHDSI vocabulary team and then mapped to standard concept ID. So if it's going to be supported, if it comes from, you know, NDCs or one of the ICDs or something like that, you don't create a custom concept for this because this will be coming down the pipeline very soon through the OHDSI vocabularies. Or if it's a new vocabulary that has a very strong use case, say you just recently joined the OHDSI community and you have a lot of drugs from your national drug vocabulary, have a discussion with the OHDSI vocabulary team for incorporation of these codes. Next slide, please. All right, maintenance. So every time you update your OHDSI vocabularies, once you download those from the from Athena and you incorporate it into your CDM, make sure you rerun your ETL. After you've done that, you need to complete an analysis of your CDM, right? You want to review your top unmapped values, and you also want to review your data for any duplicates. Are any of those source codes now represented by an OHDSI supported concept ID? Once you do those two analysis functions, then you're going to update your source to concept map or concept and concept relationship tables as needed. Next slide, please. This slide is just a slide for all of the resources that I have discussed today in the tutorial. Craig always posts these to the OHDSI forums. Once the recordings are up, he will post the slides, so you can click on the links there. And then I'm also going to add them into the chat now. If you have any questions, just put your questions into the meeting chat, and I'll take a look at those questions and answer them as time permits. And that's all. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Melanie. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick overview of our data quality processes that we've put together within OHDSI. But just as a reminder of where we've been over the course of the last few days. So we talked about technical considerations for setup, so how you would set up your server, where your vocabulary and CDM should be, like they need to be friends, they got to talk to each other. Maxim showed us how to scan our data and then map it structurally using White Rabbit and Rabbit in a Hat. And then Melanie just shared with us how we would map our vocabulary and then specifically how we handled those cases where there is not an existing concept in the vocabulary and we might need to create our own. So at this point, you would probably be somewhere around, you have your CDM, you've got your data in this standardized format, but it might be on its baby legs. Like it's new, we got to evaluate it, we got to look at it just to make sure that we've done what we set out to do, that we standardized it and that we standardized it correctly. And then we want to start looking at the quality of the content of the data as well. So we're going to shift focus and talk a little bit about data quality and then data characterization. So I had a couple things just to share with you, like why it's important. I'm not going to go through these, but these are from regulatory agencies, FDA and EMA. Just know that they are really keen on data quality, especially as they want to start making more decisions based on real world evidence. Think Darwin EU. So this is important not only for the ETL process, but also later on down the line as we want to scale up our evidence generation, we have to prove we've gone through the due diligence of assessing our data. So we're in a bit of a unique situation, I think, when we talk about data quality related to standardized data, because we have to assess the quality of the conversion, meaning, did I get my data from point A to point B correctly? But then we also want to think about the quality of the data itself and the content of the data. So when we put together our OHDSI solution, we had an eye to both of these things. Now, I'm not going to go through the tool in completeness, but just know that the way we put this together is that we rely on the standardized structure of the CDM to help us generate on the fly individual data quality checks. And we do that by defining these higher level data quality ideas or check types. So not an exhaustive list, but these ones here are ones that evaluate our conversion of the data. So did we follow all the ETL conventions? Did we walk through from source to standard correctly? So things like, does every person have at least one record in one table, even if that table is observation period? Are all the unique fields, do they have unique values in there? Are all the concepts in the condition occurrence table, are they all in the condition domain? All these things that we expect when we start to use an OMOP CDM, we can use this tool, the data quality dashboard, to check those items. So that's what these checks are doing here. And then on the flip side, we want to look at the quality of the data itself. So that's what these checks do. Something like plausible temporal after, all that's doing is saying, are all your visit end dates, do they all occur after your visit start dates? And most likely, that would be something coming from the source data rather than an artifact of the conversion to the common data model. So that's where you might go back to your source data and say, hey, what's going on here? Do I have an issue? And try to address it at that point. So we've got these 20 check types, just showing you quickly. They fall into these categories. These are defined by a paper by Michael Kahn, so I'm happy to share that with you guys if you're interested, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over that. But just know that our tool, as we've defined it, overall evaluates like 3,100 checks at this point, but the team is working hard to add more this year. And if you want to check it out, it's on GitHub, just data quality dashboard, all one word. And like I said, the team is working very hard. We just released version 1.4 with full support for CDM 5.4. So well on our way for that. And just a little note, if you wanted to just explore the output of this tool, which is a Shiny application that you can click through and see all the different checks that it evaluates, we have an example out on data.odyssey.org. You can see the link at the bottom. I will share that as well if you just want to get a feel for what the tool does and what the output looks like. And we have a paper as well if you wanted to dive even deeper into data quality, because I know you guys, like I, love data quality and want us to have the best data possible as we are expanding our reach around the globe. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Anthony, and he's going to take you through Achilles and how we can explore our data even further through characterization.
Yes, can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. Hi, I'm Anthony Molinaro. I work with Claire and Frank at Janssen, and I'm going to very quickly, so I can give Frank 5 minutes to speak, discuss Achilles. Next slide, please. Okay, before I explain what Achilles is, it's important to understand where we are in the ETL process. So Achilles will be run after your CDM is built. Now, Claire just presented a quick overview of DQD, and it's important to realize that Achilles does not depend on DQD being run first. These are two tools that operate independently of each other. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is Achilles? Achilles is an R package, and you can find it on GitHub. And I'm going to show you the results of Achilles using a tool built by our very own Frank DeFalco called Aries. And it's an R package for data characterization and quality. Now, we have a tool Claire just discussed called the Data Quality Dashboard. And we're purposefully equivocating on the word quality here, because whereas the Data Quality Dashboard allows you to perform a quantitative assessment of your data, here, Achilles enables you to perform more of a qualitative ETL validation, and it allows you to look at the evolution of your data over time in a way that's not so easy to characterize with predefined explicit checks. As far as characterization goes, for those of you who have been on these calls before, you know that the Odyssey community is on the cutting edge of methods research, in particular when it comes to study design, prediction, and effect estimates. But however, as Patrick has mentioned many times on these calls, crucial insight can be gained from characterizing your database, specifically pre-computed aggregate statistics run on your database that enables you to quickly answer questions. And this is how we're going to use Achilles. If you have very small data sets, you can do this with an Excel spreadsheet, and this is trivial. But if you're dealing with millions of people, billions of rows, and dozens of databases, now characterization becomes a non-trivial task. And a tool like Achilles is very, very important. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're just going to jump right in and see how we could use Achilles as a tool to simultaneously learn about your data from an overall database perspective, and to enable you to perform a qualitative validation of your ETL. Okay, so this is a screenshot of ARIES, and we've picked the IBM CCA database. And if you look at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you're seeing we're looking at something called the data density report. The x-axis of this plot gives you the time, you get the year, and the y-axis gives you a record count by domain. So this is a great first check to run after your CDM is built. Why? You can look at the evolution of your database records over time. Year after year or release after release, is your vendor providing you more data? Is there normal fluctuation every quarter, every year? If you jump on over to 2020, perhaps you had a global pandemic and the healthcare utilization decreased. Well, then a dip across all domains in terms of record count is expected. This is a great way to see if there is data loss or a change in your ETL, or a change due to a change in your ETL logic. Next slide, please. Okay, we started with domain record counts. Now we're going to drill down further into that. If you look at the top of the screen, we're looking at something called a person report. And here are very, very simple questions that you want to be able to answer very quickly. How many people does my database have? What is the gender breakdown? Suppose you thought that your database would look similar to the United States Medicare database. Well, you might be surprised by the bottom of your screen because we have people born after 1960, let's say. So this is a great way to see very quickly if you have the expected number of people in your database, a gender distribution, and age breakdown. Next slide, please. Okay, so we went from domain records to people. Now we're looking at visits. You are executing a study and you want to know whether or not your database supports emergency room visits. Well, if your database doesn't have any, it would not be a viable database for that study, however good the database may be. So here's this visit occurrence report is a very nice way to very quickly see what kind of visits the people have in your database. Next slide. And this is the last one. Okay, so we started from domain record counts to people to visits. Finally, we care about events. Your studies are going to look at certain events, perhaps a drug or a certain procedure. Here, we'd like to know this new database I'm looking at, does it have any patients with COVID? Well, you can enter it. I put in the string COVID-19, and I quickly saw that it was mapped to a particular concept ID. And there was over 1.5 million people with this condition concept. And on the bottom of the screen, you could see this plot. The two bars represent the interquartile range. And if I just put it here in a picture, but if you mouse over it, that little table beneath will pop up and you can see the min-max values and the percentiles. And so you see very quickly that using Achilles in conjunction with the tool to visualize the results will enable you to understand what your database looks like, how it has evolved over time, and quickly answer very, very important questions as to whether or not your database is appropriate for use for a given study. If you have more questions regarding Achilles or ARIES, you can always post your questions on the ODSI forums. Frank and I are both pretty active on GitHub, so you can use the GitHub issues or the discussion tab on either Achilles or ARIES. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Anthony. So now we've got 3 minutes left. So Frank,
sorry, Frank.
Bring it home. Break out that demo and show us what you can do when you put it all together.
So it's going to be awfully difficult to do very much in 2 minutes, 38 seconds. But what I want to share with everyone, and I will try and share my desktop quickly. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll throw this into the chat when I'm finished. in order to be able to run through all of the things you've heard across the 2 different sessions of us discussing this data operations pipeline, to be able to go from I want to take my data, ETL my data, leverage the vocabulary, characterize my data with Achilles, evaluate it with the data quality dashboard, and then review it in some magical way. I want to make that something that everyone is able to do. So a script that I use in order to facilitate that that work is something I'm sharing as what's called a gist. If you haven't heard of a gist before, it's simply and now I'm not able to switch over to my gist. So it's a sample set of code that's up on GitHub. And so I will post this link when I'm finished. What the code has for you is a easy way to go through and provide a way to generate 4 different data sources to create your own local network. It will use a tool called Cynthia to simulate data. And you can see here I'm simulating data for New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York, and Delaware. I apologize for my Northeast bias. The data is simulated, creating 250 individuals each. We then create schemas for our local CDM. We use the packages we heard about in the first session where we use ETL Cynthia leverages the Common Data Model package to build our tables, to load them, to leverage the vocabulary, which you heard Melanie discuss today, to then load running the ETL, all the data into CDMs, to run Achilles, creating all of our database characterization, to run the data quality dashboard to generate our data quality results, and then to export all of those results, throws in some temporal characterization for those who find temporal characterization fun and interesting, and then build all of this into a index that you could then go and view, visualize, leveraging Aries, which Anthony was showing briefly today. So we're at time, so that's about all I can say. But I will drop this link into the chat for those who are interested in either making use of it or collaborating on its development. Please do let me know, and I hope this has been helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much, Frank, and thank you all for sticking with us. We are going to be setting up additional CDM workshops outside of the community call, because we don't want to torture you any further, but they will be individual meetings on each one of these different topics. So if there was something that you wanted more information on, we'll be sharing that and putting those together for you all.